The root of our morale is everybody works, everybody fights. An MI doesn't pull strings to get a soft, safe job. There aren't any. Oh, a trooper will get away with what he can. Any private with enough savvy to mark time to music and think up reasons why you should not clean compartments or break out stores. This is a soldier's ancient right. But all soft, safe jobs are filled by civilians. That gold-bricking private climbs into his capsule certain that everybody, from general to private, is doing it with him. Light years away, and on a different day, or maybe an hour or so later, no matter. What does matter is that everybody drops. Listen up, you apes! Because we're in for a long haul.
We get you, sir!
Because by the time this video is done, you will know in your heart, in your very being, the meaning of this text, published by G.P. Putnam's Sons in November of 1959, and its adaptation into this film, produced by TriStar and Touchstone Pictures in 1997. You will learn every relevant detail about the all-American son of a gun who wrote this book, and about the crazy Eurotrash blood spatter artist who put this text on celluloid. The man who looked at this innocent adventure written for young boys with lots of imagination, and learned why he gave it this blasphemous reading.
There is the main narrative that is really about young boys and young girls fighting giant bugs, you know? That's the main issue. But then there is a counter-narrative that says, by the way, these people are fascist.
The bastard said that word with a smile, as if it was obvious as the sky being blue and a bug being vermin. Sure as hell, we will discuss every possible meaning of that word, along with the meaning of this word, all of these words, and perhaps even the meaning of words themselves. And if it seems like I'm overcompensating to seem more masculine and authoritative than I usually seem, that is because I am. This is a bit, and I am running with it. Some of you weaklings will quit before we're done. And that shame will be your own, and no one else's. We will talk about war. We will talk about trauma. We will talk about sexual assault. We will talk about crimes committed in the act of war. You will see blood, guts, and every imaginable type of matter produced by the human body. And if the eggheads at YouTube censorship board would let me, I would not spare you a pixel of it. You will hear every imaginable insult, slur, and derogatory comment. And I will keep up this drill sergeant character for as long as I possibly can, even if my voice cannot handle it. Wow. Soldier, you are about to learn everything there is to know about Starship Troopers. The lesson begins now. And in case you doubt my credentials, I will define my terms. I will cite my sources. I will consult the foremost experts on hand to guide your maggot brains through this text. And you will respect the experts and treat them nicely in the comments. Hi, Mom. Hey, Michael. Hey, I can't hear you. Make sure we're in gallery view. Hey, Dad. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you and I can hear you both.
Great. Hey.
Okay, let's give this a try. Do you hear me?
I do. I should say that we're recording right now.
Got it. Hang on one second. I realized I don't like the deep V.
I mean, however you want to, like, appear, where you're comfortable.
Well, I mean, banana hammock and Borat straps, obviously, but...
Background's okay?
Oh, yeah, fine. You look great. Right now, you look very Rembrandt.
So Rembrandt at what age? I guess.
Tell us your name.
Hi, my name's Michael.
And you are?
I am your younger brother, 3 years your junior.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe yourself?
Let's not.
For our viewers, hi, what's your name?
Carol Calgren.
And you are?
I'm Kyle's mom.
Hi, Mom.
And you can see where he gets his thing for books.
Yeah. We begin, not in 1959, but years later. A book written in 1973 called Time Enough for Love tells the story of a man named Lazarus Long. Lazarus, named for the biblical character resurrected by Christ in one of his miracles, was introduced in a 1958 novel titled Methuselah's Children. He would end up traveling the stars, hopping from world to world, settling, sometimes setting up what the kids are now calling polycules, and then fleeing to new planets when life got stale. Time Enough for Love is told at the end of his life, where in a framing story, he would tell vignettes of his long life for posterity. The book also has intermissions, made of a series of notes from his journals, pithy sayings jotted down over his long life. Here are only a few. Always store beer in a dark place. Men are more sentimental than women. It blurs their thinking. Certainly the game is rigged. Don't let that stop you. If you don't bet, you can't win. Any priest or shaman must be presumed guilty. Anyone who cannot cope with mathematics is not fully human. Surplusage. At best, he is a tolerable adornment human who has learned to wear shoes, which can and must be dumped in emergency to preserve this prime function. As racial survival, men rarely, if ever, no other dream of gods who carry nature require. Most gods avoid making irrevocable decisions so tired or hungry. It's a circumstance how much or chance. So think ahead. You can have peace, or you can have freedom. Don't ever count on having both at once. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. Welcome to the literature of Robert Anson Heinlein. Heinlein is considered one of the great three of the golden age of science fiction. Born in Missouri, died in California, graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, recipient of 4 Hugo Awards and 7 Retro Hugos, with a bibliography spanning 40 years. The man is science fiction royalty. He was the embodiment of the rugged individualist, and his works are among the most influential of the genre. Yes, Heinlein was that strangest animal in the universe, a writer of young adult fiction. And he's also my dad's favorite author. How old were you when you first read Heinlein?
I can't be certain. It was probably maybe 9 or 10. He was writing short stories for Boys Life when I was in Cub Scouts and in Boy Scouts. And some of his juvenile works, like the Rolling Stones, the teenagers traveling around the solar system in their family rocket ship, that started out as a short story in Boy's Life. So probably since 1960. There is so much of his stuff that I have read.
You've seen Starship Troopers, right?
I saw it. I watched it alone in the first week that it came out, and I was appalled. It was nothing like the book that I had truly come to know and love. I can't tell you how many times I've read Starship Troopers. I'd be embarrassed.
They sucked his brains out.
While the humans of Clarke's fiction were insignificant in a wonderful cosmos, and while Asimov pondered the creation of new humans in his robot series, the men, and they were men, of Heinlein stories were able to take on anything from any planet that they set their minds to. The Heinlein man is the competent man, which is best exemplified in that quote, which is at the top of Heinlein's TV tropes page.
A human being should be able to change a diaper,
Plan an invasion, butcher a hog,
Con a ship, design a building,
write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall,
set a bone,
comfort the dying, take orders, give orders,
cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure,
or program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. It's a great quote.
Time Enough for Love by Lazarus Long.
So I guess my first question is, do you agree?
I do. It's kind of an aspirational thing. I mean, nobody can be all of those things.
It honors all the skills necessary for a life.
The speech on the competent man I like very much. I've seen that in different versions. The version you had me read is from Time Enough for Love by Lazarus Long, who certainly qualifies as the archetypical competent man. A little bit little bit weird, but
He is the first successful experiment in an interbreeding program whose end goal was to create an extraordinarily long-lived line of humans.
Doesn't it end with him falling in love with his own mother because he's lived long enough he doesn't consider her a relative anymore?
Yeah, pretty much. It took a hard left turn.
I mean,
Now, in his defense, there was time travel involved, and he really was several centuries removed, and she had been dead for quite a long time. However, when you're dealing with those kinds of technicalities, you are already in bad territory.
yeah. I mean, I have some ideas of like different like sci-fi competent men, but
well, what would yours be?
I guess all the ones that came after it, like the ones that were influenced by Heinlein.
Yeah.
Doctor Who.
Yes.
Would definitely be a competent man.
The man who, in the story, has been everywhere, knows everything, and can solve every problem he is faced with. His biggest burden is knowledge. He is never wrong, he is only temporarily misguided. Everything he says is wise, quotable, and to be perfectly understood.
We've had the discussion before, and you and Michael always gave me the funny look when I told you that I could mathematically prove that you could improve your probability of success if you were willing to increase your tolerance for failure. If the result of failure is not fatal, failure allows you to experiment to find out what works, what doesn't work, and will increase your competence in new situations in the future. So that all ties together as well.
Heinlein's writing style is also distinct. His sentences can be barked, as if giving orders, direct, man to man. If I can compare his prose to anything, it might be Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, with its yearly updates of helpful aphorisms and long paragraphs declaring, not arguing, but declaring, universal truths. One could easily argue that Heinlein perfected the rhetorical style that our generation might now call mansplaining. A style that I know well. I mean, I'm a man, I splain, I'm from a family of explainers.
We're a family of explainers, I think. That's...
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I'll take that back to my father and your father. What my dad did for most of his career was work on the Congressional Record. The night of every day that Congress is in session, they have to print a book of some, 200 to 500 pages of all of the actions that were taken. But yeah, we are a family of explainers. And
If you know me personally, I'm sorry. My family was written by Aaron Sorkin.
I'm sorry, it's what we do. There are times when I think that it's our family strength, when we can, kind of stay grounded at all.
And we bond by explaining concepts to each other, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
Calvin
always...
explaining.
Yep. Calgren-splaining. So, my family might have better ideas of the competent man than me.
What is
But-
competence for you? Like,
What? Oh boy, what is? You mean? Excuse me while I Google the
all
word.
right, that's a way too big a question. Sorry.
No, what is competence for me? It's in its most fundamental function. It's survival in the best possible way. Survival with elegance. It's who is it? Something with style.
Falling with style.
Yeah.
Buzz! You're flying! This isn't flying. This is falling with style.
It's Buzz Lightyear. It's falling with style.
Buzz Lightyear, fittingly enough, could easily be a Heinlein character.
I'm Buzz Lightyear, Space Ranger, Universe Protection Unit.
He's a character modeled in the style of 1950s boy space adventures.
Orbit. Space Cadet.
In fact, this 1950s boy space adventure is a knockoff of a 1948 Heinlein novel. That novel, Space Cadet, is also the story of a military academy recruit who signs up for a spacefaring military branch. So Heinlein had told variations on the story of Starship Troopers before. Heinlein may have even mentioned a space marine once or twice, but not here. In the novel, they are always referred to as mobile infantry. Space Marine never appears. In fact, Space Marine dates to a 1932 story by Bob Olson. Nevertheless, Starship Troopers is the codifying text for the Space Marine trope. It was required reading for the actors on James Cameron's Aliens, where they actually are space marines.
Is this going to be a stand-up fight, sir, or another bug hunt?
That idea of a future military force was popular in the 1950s, and Heinlein can't claim ownership of it. Perhaps credit could go to E. E. Smith's Lensman series, collected from serialized stories dating back to 1937. But to be honest, I don't know who can claim authorship of the idea of spaceships assembled into a star fleet. And speaking of Trek, one of his juvenile stories, Heinlein described a race of alien flat cats that, while cute, multiplied too fast. David Gerrold, writer of the Star Trek episode The Trouble with Tribbles, wrote to Heinlein to apologize for accidental plagiarism. The Tribble, an alien noted for its ability to outbreed and outconsume other species, is a Heinlein creation. Take note. But Heinlein's greatest fictional creation, and one of the most lasting sci-fi tropes, is power armor. The secret lies in negative feedback and amplification. Don't ask me to sketch the circuitry of a suit. I can't. But I understand that some very good concert violinists can't build a violin, either. But here is how it works, minus the diagrams. The inside of the suit is a mass of pressure receptors, hundreds of them. You push with the heel of your hand, the suit feels it, amplifies it, pushes with you to take the pressure off the receptors that gave the order to push. That's confusing, but negative feedback is always a confusing idea the first time, even though your body's been doing it ever since you quit kicking helplessly as a baby.
It's a tutorial, as so much of Heinlein is tutorials on X, Y, and Z. The whole description of exoskeletons and powered armor, it is a letter-perfect description of how servo mechanisms work, or power assist and increase strength. I'm sorry, that is Heinlein's naval engineering training coming out of the academy, and his description that he's channeled quite well into a science fiction description.
The film didn't use it. Their special effects budget went into the bugs. But later sci-fi films, which did have the budget, used Heinlein-style power armor to full effect. Far from the heavy padding given in the film. And the open-face helmets aren't true to the book either. Mobile infantry suits had advanced fields of vision. In his narration, during the heat of battle, Johnny Rico describes glowworms crawling past my face in precise lines. Crawling because even 40 miles an hour is a slow crawl, where you can press a formation 20 miles across into a display a man can see. So here, in 1959, Heinlein perfectly describes what gamers would now call the heads-up display. Heinlein's biggest legacy in pop culture may be, indirectly, in gaming. Even before a nameless space marine became the avatar of millions of gamers looking to mow down hordes of Martian demons, space marines were the staple of the human armies of the Imperium of Man in Games Workshop's 1987 tabletop game, Warhammer 40k. Nintendo's Samus Aran, Microsoft's Master Chief, every armor-clad alien killer from the many faces of Commander Shepard, all the way down to the disposable pawns in XCOM, all, arguably, Heinlein descendants. But the most Heinlein-esque game series is, of course, the genre-defining real-time strategy classic, StarCraft, a game about tactically consuming an area's resources, using those resources to field an army, and then using that army to obliterate your enemies. And of course, it's about space marines fighting bugs. And though my dad's not a gamer, I wonder if this kind of RTS setup might be familiar to him, given the work that he did with the US Navy.
My Facebook profile lists my profession as eclectic engineer, and it's a play on what my degree is actually in, electrical engineering versus eclectic engineering. If there is one recurring theme in all of the work that I've done, it's what I would now call internet or wireless internet for the military. You know, it has evolved into that. When I started working in 1974, ARPANET had only been in existence for a couple of years. TCP/IP as a glue protocol to hang everything together hadn't even been invented yet. I got the job at Naval Research Laboratory. I had been working in the Integrated Circuits Laboratory, but the work has always been working in computers and in having computers communicate with each other. And then specifically in terms of how they're used, it's what we would call command and control. It's military talking to military, passing orders on, passing situational awareness on between people. Situational awareness is a deep phrase for just, what's going on and is it a threat to me? It's the whole thing of friend or foe who's out there.
So basically, setting up systems in order to give orders in real time. Hey, see, Dad? I wasn't wasting time in high school playing Age of Empires 2. I was learning command and control, see? See, I haven't been wasting my life. Anyway, any gamer who's found themselves playing Terran to defend themselves against a Zerg rush have found themselves in the aesthetics of a Heinlein world. But Heinlein's aesthetics are secondary to his prose.
What I thought about the movie was, God, what happened to the book that I loved? That was my basic reaction. The bugs, too much of the movie seemed to be about action, adventure, and killing bugs.
I mean, reading the book, most of it to me just seemed to be conversations between teachers and students.
That typically is the biggest and hardest and most frequently offered criticism of any of the dialogue in Robert Heinlein books. It's Heinlein preaching to his congregation.
Funny you used a preaching metaphor, Dad. Heinlein was also a social critic who was against organized religion. Many of his novels are interconnected to a long future history, a history where American democracy falls to a theocratic dictatorship under a preacher named Nehemiah Scudder, who takes office in the then far-off year of 2012. He thought that should America fall to tyrants, those tyrants would carry a cross. Worth noting that Starship Troopers is not part of this future history canon. Lazarus Long is part of this future history. And so is John Carter of Mars? Or there's one book in the Future History series where a guy and his polycule invent a way to travel to another dimension and to Mars, but it's Barsoom from the Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, because late in his life he was getting into a concept called the world as myth, but let's put a pin in that. Anyway, the history of the Federation in the film Starship Troopers is summed up in 2 lines.
This year we explored the failure of democracy, how the social scientists brought our world to the brink of chaos. We talked about the veterans, how they took control and imposed the stability that has lasted for generations since.
Which, truth be told, is a fairly accurate summary of Rico's half-remembered telling of the Federation's origins. Nobody can describe accurately how the Federation came about, it just grew. With national governments sudden collapse at the end of the 20th century, something had to fill the vacuum. And in many cases, it was returned veterans. They had lost a war. Most of them had no jobs. Many were sore as could be over the terms of the Treaty of New Delhi, especially the POW foul-up. And they knew how to fight. But it wasn't revolution. It was more like what happened in Russia in 1917. The system collapsed. Somebody else moved in. Some veterans got together as vigilantes to stop rioting and looting, hanged a few people, including 2 veterans, and decided not to let anyone but veterans on their committee. Just arbitrary at first. They trusted each other a bit, they didn't trust anyone else. What started as an emergency measure became constitutional practice in a generation or 2. If they had to do this, they weren't going to let any bleeding, profiteering, black market, double time for overtime, army-dodging, unprintable civilians have any say about it. They'd do what they were told, see? While us apes straighten things out.
Well, perhaps I'm horribly naive, but I never got the feeling that it had this huge fascist theme to it. Now maybe, yeah, raise your eyebrows.
Why are only citizens allowed to vote?
It's a reward, what the Federation gives you for doing federal service.
Anyway, as I said, if the film was a more direct adaptation of the book, most of it would be like this opening classroom scene. Most of the text of Starship Troopers is made up of lessons. Of Johnny Rico sitting down and listening to officers explain not only how to fight, but how to lead, and even how to believe. The book has Johnny often thinking back to his course in history and moral philosophy, taught by Lieutenant Colonel Jean Dubois. In the film, he's combined the leader of the Roughnecks, Lieutenant Raschak, played by Michael Ironside. This sequence plays out nearly word for word. History and moral philosophy was different from other courses in that everybody had to take it, but nobody had to pass it. And Mr. Dubois never seemed to care whether he got through to us or not. He would just point at you with the stump of his left arm, he never bothered with names, and snap a question. Then the argument would start. But on the last day, he seemed to be trying to find out what we had learned. One girl told him bluntly,
"My mother always said violence never solves anything."
So, Mr. Dubois looked at her bleakly. I'm sure the city fathers of Carthage would be glad to know that. In the film's screenplay by Ed Neumeier, he updates Carthage to Hiroshima.
I wonder what the city fathers of Hiroshima would say about that.
Why doesn't your mother tell them so? Or why don't you? They had tangled before. Since you couldn't flunk the course, it wasn't necessary to keep Mr. Dubois buttered up. She said shrilly, "You're making fun of me. Everybody knows that Carthage was destroyed." "You seem to be unaware of it," he said grimly. "Since you do know it, wouldn't you say that violence had settled their destinies rather thoroughly?" However, I was not making fun of you personally. I was heaping scorn on an inexcusably silly idea, a practice I shall always follow. Anyone who clings to the historically untrue and thoroughly immoral doctrine that violence never settles anything, I would advise to conjure up the ghost of Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington and let them debate it. The ghost of Hitler could referee, and the jury might as well be the dodo, the great auk, and the passenger pigeon. Violence, naked force, has settled more issues in history than has any other factor, and the contrary opinion is wishful thinking
at its worst.
Now, if this prose may strike some of my younger viewers as bootstrappy, segue. The 1941 novella By His Bootstraps tells the story of a man named Bob.
By his bootstraps, he basically is his own mentor at multiple points in time. He ends up as the Emperor Zod. I mean, the ruler of the universe or something close to it.
I believe what happens is he spends his time fighting against some evil emperor that he then becomes through time travel.
Yeah.
Which I believe is also the plot of BioShock Infinite.
Zachary Comstock. Use Booker DeWitt.
No. And both.
A video game that came out a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Outdoing himself, Heinlein revisited the concept in 1958's All You Zombies, in which, after meeting themselves in a bar, through time travel, baby abduction, and a massively successful gender confirmation surgery, Robert Heinlein says trans rights, a character meets themselves over and over again, and in doing so, becomes their own mother, father, child, mentor, and entire existence.
All You Zombies is quite literally only one character through the whole thing.
Upon retiring and ensuring their own existence, the protagonist runs their hand over the surgical scar where they gave birth to themselves, and declares, "I know where I came from, but where did all you zombies come from?" The Heinlein human is entirely individual. Everyone else? A zombie. That's Heinlein's legacy, the exaltation of individual skill and ingenuity. The Heinlein Society even set up a scholarship for gifted students in the fields of engineering, math, biological or chemical science, or science fiction as literature. The scholarship is named for one of Heinlein's mottos, "Pay it forward," because Heinlein has always been some of the hardest of hard sci-fi. So, of course, he would be appealing to STEM majors. Like my dad.
I've always liked hard science fiction because of what it can tell you about how to do things better, or how to do things, full stop, period. I am not one to believe that if I carve a pentagram in my backyard and chant the right songs, throwing the right herbs into the center pentangle of the diagram, that I'm going to get anything beneficial out of it, other than maybe some relaxation and fun. If I take something and throw together certain minerals and metals and insulators and create something that can transmit sound from A to B, or turn on a light bulb, or reduce my energy consumption, those things I've always found appealing, just because that's tangible and achievable magic for me. The science and the hard science, and that is very much what Robert Heinlein was into.
I suppose it makes sense then that Heinlein was popular among Boy Scout troops, a group defined by building survival skills.
You're an Eagle Scout.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do to get that rank?
Well, I could just say look up the Family Guy bits talking about Boy Scouts.
Ma'am, I'd like to take your son into the woods.
What?
Michael, I want to hear you describe it in your own words.
I know. No, I know. I mean, we were taught a whole bunch of different things, and we were expected to figure out how to learn a lot of things at the same time. In practice, we were taught the basics of fieldcraft and personal management in the sense of developing our mind, body, and spirit to be of best service to our fellow countrymen and women. I mean, the Boy Scouts was founded in the aftermath of a military operation where Lord Baden-Powell realized that a lot of the newbies coming out of boot camp that had been conscripted just didn't have a lot of fieldcraft, and there was only so much that you could teach.
For our viewers, what's fieldcraft?
Navigating through the woods, treating minor injuries that come about as a result of that.
So how to hike, basically. How to properly hike.
Yeah, how to not die in the woods.
A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an
I would
invasion.
paraphrase that in the Boy Scout motto: be prepared. It's aspirational. Be ready for what comes at you and do your best to handle it.
Hey, I'll admit that the attitude here is a little inspiring. Hell, I'm a YouTuber, I'm self-employed, I push myself to make every part of this video myself. I read my sources, I wrote this script, painted the wall behind me chroma key green, set up the LED lights, I shot this video, recorded this sound, I edited the video, I uploaded it to this platform. I have done everything that a human being should be able to do. I can be proud of that, right? 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 Robert Heinlein was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, an enlisted man. One from a long line of enlisted men. According to his biographer, a Heinlein family tradition states that a member of his family has fought in every war since the American Revolution. So, Heinlein is Lieutenant Dan. Heinlein was a Navy man. He was honorably discharged from the service after lung problems made it impossible for him to serve. Yet, despite his medical problems, he still served as a naval engineer during the Second World War. In Philadelphia. Far from any battle. But even if he had been medically fit to serve, unlike Johnny Rico, he would have been piloting the ship, not dropping from it. Makes me wonder why in his novel, Heinlein chose to segregate his armed forces based on sex, and why the Army is all male and the Navy all female. Besides the obvious fact that drop and retrieval required the best pilots, i.e. female, there is very strong reason why female naval officers are assigned to transports. It is good for trooper morale. Right, that's why. The heterosexual agenda. Let's skip MI traditions for a moment. Can you think of anything sillier than letting yourself be fired out of a spaceship with nothing but mayhem and sudden death at the other end? However, if someone must do this idiotic stunt, do you know of a surer way to keep a man keyed up to the point where he is willing than by keeping him constantly reminded that the only good reason why men fight is a living, breathing reality? What do we want? A girl worth fighting for. In a mixed ship, the last thing a trooper hears before a drop, maybe the last word he ever hears, is a woman's voice, wishing him luck. If you don't think this is important, you've probably resigned from the human race. Robert Anson Heinlein, go to horny jail! Okay, so even Heinlein's fans know that he has a complex way of describing women. He liked women. He liked women who were smart and could build machines. In fact, he married an engineer and they moved to Colorado and made a house full of gadgets so they could survive the inevitable nuclear apocalypse, but still, his women were basically men he could do sex at. However,
Heinlein, besides the competent man, besides the hard science fiction, he was also into looking at how things change, how societies change, how people change under the influence of technology. Never been a favorite of mine. If I look on the internet, I'm not sure it's a favorite of anybody's, but this is I Will Fear No Evil. I Will Fear No Evil is about a guy who's dying, who arranges to have and then unexpectedly succeeds in having his consciousness transferred to another body. The kicker in the story, and that he doesn't plan on it, and that really throws him for a loop, is that this aging alpha male has his consciousness transferred into the young, nubile, and very gorgeous body of his female assistant.
Robert Heinlein says trans rights.
Much mussing over sex and gender and everything else comes out of that story.
But the fact is that Heinlein's Federation has clear roles for Army and Navy. And Heinlein, in his long discussions of proper interdepartmental regulation, wrote about friction between the two. The real Navy opinion is even more extreme. The Army is obsolete and should be abolished. The Navy doesn't say this officially, but talk to a naval officer who is on R&R and feeling his oats. You'll get an earful. They think they can fight a war, win it, and send a few of their own people down to hold the conquered planet until the diplomatic corps takes charge. This conflict made it into the film, too.
Mobile infantry and fleet don't mix.
So I can't help but wonder if Heinlein, a Navy man, was entertaining or imagining the ideas of the Army. Yes, they're both part of the US Armed Forces, and if you're not with them, they're just as likely to bomb you, but they are both organizations, like any other, each with their own traditions and their own culture. According to the Rand Corporation study, The Masks of War, the Army and Navy and Air Force have very different self-images. In particular, they're described as having separate altars for worship, what they revere as a principle and cherish as an ideal. Tradition has always been an important part of military life, but the Navy, much more than any of the other services, has cherished and clung to tradition. If tradition is the altar at which the Navy worships, then one of the icons on that altar is the concept of independent command at sea, which, like the Holy Grail, used to be sought and honored by every true naval officer. Independent command of ships at sea is a unique, godlike responsibility, unlike that afforded to commanding officers in the other services. The altar at which the Army worships is less apparent than the altars of the other two services. That may be because its ideals are more diffuse, or variable, or subtle. Several consistent themes surface, however, when the Army talks about itself. They have to do with the depth of its roots in the citizenry, its long and intimate history of service to the nation, and its utter devotion to country. Of all the military services, the Army is the most loyal servant and progeny of this nation, its institutions, and people. If the Army worships at an altar, the object worshipped is the country, and the means of worship are service.
Service guarantees citizenship.
Starship Troopers? Well, it's an Army story from a Navy writer. An exploration of the philosophy behind service, written by a naval engineer. And Heinlein wrote the book in 1959, after the Korean War, just before the Vietnam War, when the US still had a policy of conscription. I imagine a large part of why Starship Troopers is the way it is comes from Eisenhower's America, 1, wouldn't dare question the military-industrial complex, and 2, Heinlein was speaking to a readership familiar with the debate around the merits of a conscripted army versus an all-volunteer one.
You were never drafted, but
I was never drafted. The military was, I was an engineering student doing well on engineering that was relevant both to the space program and to other stuff, and nobody thought twice about whether or not I was abusing the student deferment privilege. They said, yep, you're a 2S. I would have gone. I suppose I would have gone.
In the past, armies have been known to fold up and quit because the men didn't know what they were fighting for, or why, and therefore lacked the will to fight. But the MI does not have that weakness. Each one of us was a volunteer to begin with, each for some reason or another. Some good, some bad. But now we fought because we were MI. We were professionals, with a spirit de corps. We were Raschak's Roughnecks, the best unprintable outfit in the whole expurgated MI. We climbed into our capsules because Jelly told us it was time to do so, and we fought when we got down there because that is what Raschak's Roughnecks do. We certainly didn't know that we were losing.
First book of Heinlein's that I ever read was Starship Troopers. I was just new in Boy Scouts. Marines from the U.S. Embassy had come by to talk to us about, the Marine Corps, military service. It was very much it was not a recruitment event, but it was also a recruitment event. We were nowhere near the proper age, but, sow the seeds of military service young. Anyway, this Marine came here, and afterwards, Dad and I went to talk to him about Grandpa, who of course was a sergeant major in the Marine Corps, and we got to talking about how one of Dad's favorite books growing up, or science fiction books growing up, was Starship Troopers, which up until relatively recently had been on the Marine Corps officers' required reading lists when they were going through command school.
It was taken off recently?
As far as I'm aware.
The description of the communications gear on the Parrot suits is a perfect description of a command organization for a platoon or a division or a brigade, and it's a lot of what we did when I was working for NATO, was trying to figure out how to provide those kinds of communications channels. Heinlein drops it as maybe a page and a half or 2-page tutorial at the beginning of the book as Johnny's learning about how the suits work. It's beautiful.
Which may be why it makes it to the command reading list, right? Or to the officers' reading list.
It's
another book.
been...
Another book that was on the reading list. Mm-hmm. Ready Player One.
Well, talking about how to organize disparate groups for a revolution in a method of asymmetric warfare. Yeah, I believe that.
I had trouble figuring out when it was added to the Commandant's professional reading list, so I have no idea if my grandfather, Sergeant Major Bernard McVeigh, has read it.
One of the places that Grandma and Grandpa lived, outside, not on the base, but at Lejeune, off the base. New neighbors moved in. The guy was out mowing his lawn, no shirt, he was a short sister, it was hot, North Carolina. And either Grandma or Grandpa said, I think he must be a lieutenant. And the other one said, how do you know? He said, because he's walking like he's got a ramrod up.
My grandfather, Sergeant Major Bernard McVeigh, did 2 tours of Vietnam. I never knew much about what he did there, other than it was what eventually killed him. Lung cancer from exposure to Agent Orange. I think he was a drill sergeant?
He was a drill sergeant, right?
Mm-hmm. Who, Dad? Grandpa?
Grandpa, yeah.
No.
Oh, whoops.
First words and the last words out of your stinking holes will be, sir. Do you get me? Sir, yes, sir.
Drill sergeants are special training. He did not like that. They sent him to that school and he quit it. Well, I wasn't raised by a Marine. I grew up in and around the Marine Corps. But Grandpa was nobody's idea of, at home anyway, was nobody's idea of the great Santini.
Who's the great Santini?
Oh.
You disobeyed a direct order, Hog! A direct order from your commanding officer. Yes, sir.
If you thought stereotypical hard-ass Marine, heart of the family, everything is, spit and polish at home, and it was in this book, it's abusive. That is not Grandpa.
Marines.
We also grew up in one particular neighborhood in Alexandria, that there were a couple of other young Marine officers living in the same set of row houses. And they were the kind, one of them, his 2 little boys, were afraid of water. But, they didn't like their faces to get wet. So he made them take showers facing the water. And you could hear the kids screaming. And we also did know families that there was abuse going on. Physical abuse. And Grandma is still in touch with one of the women. So, so that is not Grandpa.
In the U.S. Armed Forces, both the Navy and the Marines fall under the Department of the Navy, and there's definitely institutional cultural overlap. I suppose my audience's most familiar portrayal of life in the Department of the Navy would be this Stanley Kubrick film.
There is no racial bigotry here. I do not look down on or here you are all equally worthless.
But the fascinating thing about R. Lee Ermey's performance here was that he actually was a Marine Corps drill sergeant for many years. And most importantly, Kubrick, ever the perfectionist, let him improvise his lines.
How tall are you, Private? Sir, 5'9", sir! 5'9", I didn't know they stacked that high.
These unbelievable strings of abuse were off the top of his head, almost as if he had them in reserve somewhere.
But like I said, Grandpa was not a drill sergeant, and he didn't curse. Because, I can have a bad mouth fairly free. Yes, I did not learn that from at home.
You ever hear a Marine curse a guy out?
Oh, yeah.
Bullshit, it looks to me like the best part of you ran down the crack of your mama's ass and ended up as a brown stain on the mattress.
Different theories about that. Part of it is shock value.
Wipe that stupid-looking grin off your face, or I will gouge out your eyeballs and skull you.
Much more ominous is a kind of obscene supplement to pure military discipline.
Here's another theory. Noted Marxy man Slavoj Žižek likes to cite this film as an example of how sniff ideology sniff is able to seduce by allowing militarism to function within a framework of filthy jokes.
All his obscene shouting is just a show put on not so much to impress ordinary soldiers whom he is training as to bribe them with bits of enjoyment. You take this obscene supplement away and military machine stops working.
Slavoj Žižek has been called the Elvis of philosophy, and it's true. Everyone can do a funny impression of him, and there are about 100 people of color doing the same thing that you'd be better off listening to. But Žižek did indeed serve in the military for a year. It was mandatory in the former Yugoslavia, so the most he got out of his time there was hearing a culture of obscene jokes used on new recruits. I'm sure the many, many American veterans in my comment section are dismissing his reading of military culture as I'm talking about it. But the principle he's talking about is a very basic one. It's about building a spirit de corps, from the French, spirit of the body. Building a group morale so full that your body becomes essential to the body of the group.
With Starship Troopers, for me, it's, the dedication to an ethos, to a group. Now, I don't know. Is that fascism? I don't know.
Well, I suppose that depends on what that group is. I mean, fascists don't vote. And the people of the Federation have the vote, right? Well, a select few, like those who enlist. So, some people have the vote. Some. All systems seek to achieve this by limiting franchise to those who are believed to have the wisdom to use it justly. I repeat, all systems. Even the so-called unlimited democracies, excluded from franchise not less than 1/4 of their populations by age, birth, poll tax, criminal record, or other. I'm sorry, poll tax? That rings a bell. Southern Belle. Now, correct me in my history, but weren't the payment of poll taxes in America used as a requisite to vote in many states? Effectively barring anyone who couldn't pay the tax from voting? And the thing about criminal record, that makes perfect sense. Wouldn't want criminals to vote, says the society that gets to define what constitutes a crime. So I'm going to piss off a lot of Heinlein fans by bringing up this book, but here goes.
I'd kick myself for not mentioning this. Farnham's Freehold, where...
Oh, that one is so problematic.
Do you want to describe the plot, or should I?
Oh, well, yeah. It's, again, the competent man invites his son and the son's girlfriend to an evening of bridge and drinking, and I'm trying to remember, maybe drugs as well, at the beginnings of what ends up being a thermonuclear war that they improbably survive because they hide in the bomb shelter. I mean, every competent man has a bomb shelter. When the nuclear blast hits, and this is one of those things that, pure speculation, I'm not sure about the science of this, they are thrust forward in time. Whether or not it's into an alternate universe or whatever, but they're thrust forward in time into a world where Africans of all nations have become the ruling elite and the ruling class. And whites are not.
I just want to appreciate how careful my dad is being in describing this novel.
They are enslaved, in some cases castrated, in some cases bred as meat and cannibalized. And Farnham's wife has her mind totally blown, so she turns to drugs and alcohol. I think she becomes concubine to one of the ruling elite.
Yeah.
Which left Hugh Farnham and his son's girlfriend to kind of become allies to figure out how they were going to get the hell out of it.
What's the phrase? Fear of a black planet? Fear of a essentially.
Yeah, we're going to the question that comes up in analysis of a lot of Heinlein's work. Was he a racist or was he an anti-racist? There are so many of his stories that the ethnicity or the race of the protagonist is kind of revealed to you only slowly or subsumed in a characterization and a persona that could be anybody.
Well, Starship Troopers ends like right after the big battle with Johnny Rico revealing that he was Juan and his native language is Tagalog.
Yeah.
It's Filipino.
Like what the heck? Why didn't I realize that?
Dad, I didn't have a response then, but I've had time to think about it. Why make Johnny Rico non-white? The reveal that Johnny, or Juan Rico, is Filipino doesn't strike me as specifically anti-racist. The reveal happens when Rico says something to himself in Tagalog, which is not written in the text, and is then translated for us as the English language saying, "Home is where the heart is." Heinlein also includes a passage praising Ramon Magsaysay, veteran of the Battle of Bataan and president of the Philippines until his death in 1957, in a regime noted for its hard stance against communism. The model American reader of Starship Troopers walks away knowing little about Philippine culture, other than the name of a leader and the fact that they were our ally in combat. Well, considering that America got the Philippines from the Spanish in 1898, then suppressed their resistance movements until 1935 when they were invaded by the Japanese and only formally recognized their independence after the war, what does that mean for us? I don't know what, if anything, a Filipino reader might get out of this book's representation, but even if a film adaptation cast a Filipino actor as Rico, I nominate Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's Vincent Rodriguez III.
Angry. Feeling bad. Why do I feel this way?
It would still be the representation of the sixth-generation German-American's idea of a good soldier, who happens to be from a former American colony, who gives and receives orders only in straightforward American English. In 1952, a non-fictional veteran who, like Juan Rico, came from a colonized country and fought the Axis for the sake of his colonizers, wrote this: "Every colonized people, in other words, every people in whose soul an inferiority complex has been created by the death and burial of its local cultural originality, finds itself face to face with the language of the civilizing nation, that is, with the culture of the mother country. The colonized is elevated above his jungle status in proportion to his adoption of the mother country's cultural standards. He becomes whiter as he renounces his blackness, his jungle." In the French colonial army, and particularly in the Senegalese regiments, the black officers serve first of all as interpreters. They are used to convey the master's orders to their fellows, and they too enjoy a certain position of honor. That veteran was Fanon, a descendant of slaves born in French Martinique, who fled the island when it was taken by the Vichy regime and joined the Free French forces. He experienced harsh racism from the French, Gaullist and Vichy, and he would write of the psychology of the colonized in his classic text on post-colonial theory, entitled Black Skin, White Masks. So we return to the question, why make Johnny Rico non-white? The Major added, "Can anyone define why there has never been a revolution against our system, despite the fact that every government in history has had such? Despite the notorious fact that complaints are loud and unceasing?" One of the older cadets took a crack at it. "Sir, revolution is impossible. Yes, but why? Because revolution, armed uprising, requires not only dissatisfaction, but aggressiveness. A revolutionist has to be willing to fight and die, or he's just a parlor pink. If you separate out the aggressive ones and make them the sheepdogs, the sheep will never give you trouble." I'm not going to say that Heinlein was a racist. I am going to say that he wasn't exactly a post-colonial theorist either. But Heinlein's beliefs changed over time. He actively supported the progressive Democrat Upton Sinclair's campaign for governor of California in 1934. And he also actively supported paleo-conservative Republican Barry Goldwater's campaign for president in 1964. One thing he was definitely not was a Marxist. In fact, he takes some time out in Starship Troopers to explicitly refute Marxist theory. For some reason.
Actually, let me find it,
Okay.
quote it directly.
Is this Colonel Dubois debunking the idea of communism versus the wonderful government that they have under the Federation?
Of course, the Marxian definition of value is ridiculous.
Quoting from Starship Troopers.
All the work one cares to add will not turn a mud pie into an apple tart. It remains a mud pie, value 0. By corollary, unskillful work can easily subtract value. An untalented cook can turn wholesome dough and fresh green apples, valuable already, into an inedible mess, value 0. No one can make an apple tart from a mud pie. You need the dough and apples to even try. I mean, you could make it from a mud pie if you could change any form of matter into another. I mean, what's the Carl Sagan quote?
If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe.
I mean, both the skilled cook and the unskilled cook still need to access the materials required to even try to make an apple tart. If the tart is edible or not, the nature of those individuals are still dependent on the material conditions determining their production. But anyway. These kitchen illustrations demolish the Marxian theory of value, the fallacy from which the entire magnificent fraud of communism derives, and to illustrate the truth of the common sense definition as measured in terms of use. Heinlein's talking about the labor theory of value. In summary, the value of a material good is determined by the amount of socially necessary labor to produce it. For example, a fine suit is worth more than wool, because it takes more hours of labor to shear the sheep, weave the wool into a textile, and sew the suit together. It's a key concept to understand Marxian economics because Marx argues that the wages paid to laborers must always be lower than the actual value of their labor in order to generate a profit, or capital, which is why the working class is being exploited under capitalism. And therefore dismantling that argument is a very, very important thing to anti-Marxists.
Nevertheless, wake up back there, presumably saying to another student.
The disheveled old mystic of Das Kapital, turgid, tortured, confused, and neurotic.
Unscientific, illogical, this pompous fraud, Karl Marx, nevertheless had a glimmering of a very important truth. If he had possessed an analytical mind, he might have formulated the first adequate definition of value, and this planet might have been saved endless grief.
Isn't this book about fighting bugs?
Value has no meaning than in relation to living beings. Value of a living thing is always relative to a particular person, is completely personal, and in different quantity for each living human. Market value is a fiction, merely a rough guess at the average of personal values, all of which must be quantitatively different for trade would be possible.
This very personal relationship, value, has two factors for a human being. First, what he can do with a thing, its use to him. And second, what he must do to get it, its cost to him. There's an old song which asserts the best things in life are free. Not true. Utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted and get it without toil, without sweat, without tears.
Yeah.
Nothing of value is free.
Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. If you boys and girls had to sweat for your toys the way a newly born baby has to struggle to live, you would be happier and much richer. As it is, with some of you, I pity the poverty of your wealth. The best things in life are beyond money. Their price is agony and sweat and devotion. And the price demanded for the most precious of all things in life is life itself. Ultimate cost for perfect value.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
Like I constantly have to prove myself worthy of being alive.
Well, I'm not sure I would take it that far. There are several nuggets there. He returns to the idea that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. The mood is a harsh mistress. You know, and when he talks about, you know, nothing being free, including the air you breathe, a thing is worth what someone is willing to pay for it.
And if you can't pay that price, I mean,
if you can't pay that price, well then, you know, do you really need it? If the pandemic has proven anything to us right now, it's that The economy dies if we can't continue to convince people to buy things that they don't really need.
When I recorded these Zoom calls, it was right before the last US presidential election, and early voting was still going on in New York.
But you voted yesterday. Yay!
I did. Yes, I did vote yesterday.
I'll admit now, I almost didn't. It's a pandemic. I'm not in a swing state, and a significant part of me thought it may not be worth putting my life on the line to vote. Of course, historically, people have died for the right to vote. They paid that price. And yes, they paid that price in the book.
Reading it was kind of terrifying.
Well, yeah.
Because someone dies during basic training, and he doesn't really devote a lot of words to it.
Well, but sadly, that's very true. I mean, we've got people now that die in basic training. We don't have to be at war to have people who have enlisted in the military die.
So what about those who supposedly sacrifice nothing? Those uninteresting, untested, unknown civilians? Soldiers do work that civilians can't do, or we would hire civilians. Civilians are like beans. You buy them as needed for any job which merely requires skill and savvy, but you can't buy fighting spirit. It's scarce. We use all of it, waste none. The MI is the smallest army in history for the size of the population it guards. You can't buy an MI. You can't conscript him, you can't coerce him, you can't even keep him if he wants to leave. He can quit 30 seconds before a drop, lose his nerve, and not get into his capsule. And all that happens is that he's paid off and can never vote. And that's all. He can never vote. If I went career, I was just as far away from the privilege of voting as if I had never enrolled. Because as long as you were still in uniform, you weren't entitled to vote. Which is the way it should be, of course. Why, if they let the roughnecks vote, the idiots might vote not to make a drop. Can't have that. I had signed up in order to win a vote. Or had I? Had I ever cared about voting? No. It was the prestige, the pride, the status of being a citizen. Or was it? I couldn't to save my life remember why I'd signed up. Anyhow, it wasn't the process of voting that made a citizen. The lieutenant had been a citizen in the truest sense of the word, even though he had not lived long enough to ever cast a ballot. He had voted every time he made a drop, and so had I. Those quotes around the word voted are doing a hell of a lot of work, huh? Truth is, no one votes in the novel. No ballots are filled out. Hell, there's never any description of who or what they would vote for. Because this book isn't about voting. Voting is just an abstraction far removed from the reality of Rico's life and training. Because service is the goal. Service means citizenship. And what is citizenship? I could hear Colonel Dubois in my mind. Citizenship, a state of mind, an emotional conviction that the whole is greater than the part, that the part should be humbly proud to sacrifice itself, that the whole may live. The same sentiment is heard in the repeated cry, "Come on, you apes, do you want to live forever?" It's the first quote cited in the book. Heinlein attributes it to an unknown platoon sergeant in 1918. The US Marines know that man as Daniel Daly, a sergeant major, same rank as my grandfather. Heinlein cleaned up his quote with apes. Marine Corps lore gives the quote as, "Come on, you sons of bitches, ... It's an inspirational battle cry, reminding you of your own mortality and asking you to make your inevitable death meaningful. No one in my immediate family has seen a battlefield. Still, that culture of service has been part of all my family's life. From my dad's time in the Scouts and later work with the Naval Research Laboratory, to my mother's childhood on Marine bases, and my brother's hard work and dedication to getting the title of Eagle Scout. Hell, even though I've never been in a cockpit, I've sometimes even found myself using the NATO phonetic alphabet when I struggle over the phone. So that's G-R-E-M? No, one more time. It's Kilo Alpha Lima Lima Golf Romeo Echo November. N as in Nancy? So of my family, I am the least qualified person to talk about the culture of the military. I wanted to be an actor when I grew up. So I only understand military service as something that is performed.
Like you taught me what a parade rest was.
That's a parade rest, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I fully admit that this is a character that I'm performing. And I only read Starship Troopers for the first time to do this video. So if you commenters are going to rail on me for not being as big a Heinlein fan as you, do so. But I have read my Heinlein. My first Heinlein was Stranger in a Strange Land, the story of a human, Valentine Michael Smith, raised by Martians and brought to Earth. He brings the Martian ways to humanity, though they may not be quite ready for them. Those Martian ways include free love, which is how Heinlein got the hippies on his side. Smith also founds a religion, the Church of All Worlds, and makes himself the head of that church. Valentine Michael Smith, like Johnny Rico, is a bit of a cipher, childlike, and in his attempts to adjust to his new surroundings, he repeatedly uses a word that seems, in context, to mean comprehend. I will not pronounce it, because I'm convinced that Heinlein was intending to describe something that could only be barely pronounced by a human mouth. In describing the Martian language, he used the phrase, like a bullfrog fighting a cat. Ow. Anyway, Heinlein spells the word Golf Romeo Oscar Kilo.
All of the commentary that I've heard on it by English speakers has basically just done the, said the word grok.
Grok.
Yeah.
And the word translates to something between understanding and drinking deep. Understand so fully, it becomes part of your being.
The exact words of the text. But do you understand it? Do you believe it?
But that word has deeper meanings. It has an almost violent connotation. The Martians were said to grok the fifth planet in our solar system so deeply that it became the asteroid belt. But most importantly, it's a divine word. I grok, you grok, the grass you walk upon groks, and all that groks is God. Upon recollecting my first reading of the book, I remembered reading the word and figuring out how it sounded in my head, because written language and spoken language are very different animals, and certain meanings can be lost with the written word and spoken. But with that sound, that strange Martian alien sound, the most suitable way I found to pronounce it in my head was not the American grok, but hawk.
Hawk. See where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
And do you see the picture behind me? Do you recognize that?
Yes, that's our Aunt Deb did that. That's the canal behind our house.
Right. I figured I would put it there as a visual reminder. I thought she did a great job. I mean, she saw it when they visited, and Dad took a picture, sent her the pictures, and that's what she worked from was, her perceived memory and the picture.
Well, it looks beautiful. I mean, it is technically a Dutch landscape painting.
Yes.
So
it was your bus stop the first year
yes.
You were there.
Hello everyone, thank you for watching this far into the video. I know it's a long one, and it's still longer because I had a lot to say about this movie. And thank you so much to my family for helping out with this project. You will see more of them in the next video. Thank you so much to my patrons, whose names are scrolling by right now. You can see a preview of the next installment of this video if you pledge to my Patreon. Patrons also get early access to videos. You can see the rough cuts before the final cuts hit YouTube. And at the highest tier, you can actually watch me make the next video as I live stream my editing process. And I've seen other YouTubers do this, and I wanted to try it myself. If you made it this far into the video, put the unicorn emoji in the comments to let me know that you've watched the whole thing. Hopefully part 2 should be out soon, and part 3 after that. Life to not fascism.